Hey, welcome to another story time. Today, you're going to read The Absolutely True Diary of a Part-Time Indian. This is the most recent book that we're reading in this class, and so it'll be interesting to see why you think I picked this or why you think it might be important. It's a great story, and I kind of want to tell you a lot about it, so let's get right to it. Hopefully you're seeing that now. So the book was published in 2007, as you see there. The author is Sherman Alexie, who the book is somewhat autobiographical, and so a lot of the places and events that you see really happened to him. But obviously he made some changes to make it more exciting. Also, it's a young adult fiction book, so it's really easy to read. It's only a couple hundred pages, so if you like the story and want to see how he writes and reads, then go ahead and read this. It won awards and things when it first came out. But I'm going to tell you the story of it, so it's a pretty good one. Things I want you to think about is, what does the title mean? Absolutely true, or part-time. What does that mean as far as identity goes? Also think about things like race. He's a Native American. He uses the term Indian, and so I'll use it as well, but I think we know now that the proper term is Native American. Also think about the impact of pain and sorrow on people's lives, and the power of friendship and family, and community, and what that all means as well. So I take you through the book chapter by chapter, and the title of each chapter is at the top there. The first chapter is Black Eye of the Month Club. He talks about when he was born. He was born with water on the brain, and they had to go in and take out the extra fluid in his head, which caused him problems throughout the rest of his life. He also had 10 extra teeth, which he said was 10 teeth past human. And what's more, he says our white dentists believe that Indians only felt half as much pain as white people did, so he only gave us half the Novocaine. So when he was little, he had his all 10 teeth taken out at the same time. His sight was affected by all of this, and so he had to wear thick glasses, and because they were poor and all, they couldn't really afford nice glasses that might look good. They were just the big black framed glasses. He was very skinny, he had large feet, you can see. In third grade, he had size 11 shoes, and he had a big head. So obviously I looked goofy on the outside, but it was the inside stuff that was the worst. He also stuttered and had a lisp, and I'm not sure if any of you have ever had a speaking disorder. I did when I was growing up. I stuttered a lot, immensely. I also couldn't say my R's, and so it was like Elmer Fudd, right? So I would say things like wabbit. When are you gonna come around? Things like that. And it took me a while. It took me like third, fourth, fifth grade, when I would go to a speech therapist at Mingus Elementary and kind of work that way out. But it's difficult, right? So he was beat up all the time. And this was why he had his black eye of the month. At least once a month, he said he'd get beat up pretty good that he had a black eye. And so because of that, he tried to stay home and just eliminate himself from the world. And he began to draw. He loved drawing. I draw because words are too unpredictable, he says. I draw because words are too limited. So I draw because I want to talk to the world, and I want the world to pay attention to me. I think the world is a series of broken dams and floods, and my cartoons are tiny lifeboats. That's what he says. By the way, his name is Arnold, or Junior. Arnold Spirit is his official name, but he's a junior, so everybody calls him Junior. the next chapter, why chickens mean so much to me. We find out that he lives in the Spokane Indian Reservation in Washington State. He realizes he's poor, and this is how he defines poverty equals empty refrigerator plus empty stomach. But he loved chicken. And so every once in a while, his mom would bring home KFC. And believe me, a good piece of chicken, he writes, can make anybody believe in God. He had a dog named Oscar who one day got sick. He told his mom was like, he'll be okay. But he knew she was lying. And he writes, we Indians should be better liars considering how often we've been lied to. There was nothing I can do to save Oscar. Nothing. So his dad came home and saw what was going to happen and got the gun and told Junior to bring the Oscar outside. Dad just looked down at me with the saddest look in his eyes. He was crying. He looked weak. And they put the dog out of his misery. And it was at that point he feels like he hated his parents. He didn't blame his parents for the situation that the way they ended. He knew that his parents had dreams of their own, but they never worked out. Like he knew his mom wanted to be a teacher and read everything. His father wanted to be a musician, and he could sing and play some instruments very, very well, but they never did anything about it. And he recognized he was poor. This is what he writes here in this chapter. It sucks to be poor. It sucks to feel that you somehow deserve to be poor. You start believing that you're poor because you're stupid and ugly, and you start believing that you're stupid and ugly because you're Indian. And talking about shooting the dog instead of taking him to the veterinarian, he says a bullet only costs 2 cents, and anybody can afford that. So already this is a pretty sad story. Poor Arnold, poor Junior. Revenge is my middle name is the next chapter. His best friend Rowdy is like the reservation. He's a tough kid on the reservation, kind of crazy, Rowdy. No one really likes Rowdy. No one really likes Junior, but they're best friends. He tells Rowdy, and they tell secrets to each other. He tells Rowdy one day that he's just thinking about just going away. And Rowdy tells him it's not like anyone's going to notice if you go away, so you might as well get it out. Rowdy's father is a horrible father, beats him. He's an alcoholic, all those kinds of things. And Junior's own parents, Junior's father is an alcoholic as well. And his mom works hard, but, is satisfied with her life. One night, Rowdy and Junior decide to go to the powwow. There's a big powwow they have every year. Junior didn't want to go because he was afraid he was going to get picked on and beaten up. He writes, he knew that I was afraid of getting beat up, Rowdy, and he also knew that he'd probably have to fight for me. But they go anyways. Junior recognizes that Rowdy is the only person that listens to me. Rowdy trips over as they're walking through the woods or something. Rowdy trips on a branch, and Junior laughs at him, and he finds out that that's not what you should do. Don't laugh at Rowdy. So Rowdy's angry. Junior runs away, and he runs right into the camp of the Andros brothers, who kind of shove him around. They play catch with him, he says. The Andros brothers are 30 years old, but they're still picking on him. When Rowdy finds this out, he sneaks into their camp when they're passed out drunk, and he shaves off their eyebrows and cuts off their braids. For Native Americans, that's kind of an important thing. No one ever finds out that it's Rowdy, but it makes Junior feel good that someone stood up for him. Rowdy loves comic books and the drawings that Junior does. Junior says he's not a fast reader, but he's persistent. He likes to make him laugh. I guess a fake life inside a cartoon is a lot better than his real life. His recognition of the pain that Rowdy is going through. And Rowdy tells Junior his dreams, and Junior draws them. I draw his dreams, he writes, and he only talks about his dreams with me, and I only talk about my dreams with him. I tell him about my fears. Rowdy and I are inseparable. So these are words that Junior writes, hopefully to show you the deep connection that Rowdy and Junior have. The next chapter is called Because Geometry is Not a Country, somewhere near France. Mary is Junior's sister, and after she graduates, she just kind of freezes, like there's nothing in her life. She doesn't know what to do. So she runs away. We don't really know where she's going. Both Rowdy and Junior like to play basketball. In the one day they go back to school, Junior's in the geometry class, I think, and he gets the book passed out from Mr. P, and who's the teacher, and he opens the book, and Junior just wants to learn. He's a pretty smart kid. He wants to learn, and he wants to kiss this book. He smells the book, he kisses it, and then he opens the book to kiss it, and he says that the book belongs to Agnes Adams. Agnes Adams is Junior's mother, and they realize this book is 30 years old, and he gets really angry because the school is so bad that they haven't bought new geometry books in 30 years. And he feels the world is against him. What do you do when the world has declared nuclear war on you? He writes. So he throws the book at Mr. P and hits him, breaks his nose. And so Junior gets suspended. But the teacher comes by his house, and he asks Junior, do you know why you hit me with that book? And Junior says, I hit you because I'm stupid. Mr. P says, you're not stupid. And then there must be a passage I want to read you here. Junior says, you know, Mr. P, I don't mean to be rude or anything, but you're like freaking me out here. I mean, why are you here exactly? Mr. P says, well, I want you to know that hitting me with that book was probably the worst thing you've ever done. It doesn't matter what you intended to do. What happens is what you really did. And you broke an old man's nose. That's almost unforgivable. But I do forgive you, he said. No matter how much I want to forgive you. It's the only thing that keeps me from smacking you with an ugly stick. When I first started teaching here, that's what we did to rowdy ones. You know, we beat them. That's how we taught you to, that's how we were taught to teach you. We were supposed to kill the Indian to save the child. There's a history of this, of killing the Indian to save the child back many, many years ago. Some well-meaning white people decided to create these schools for Native Americans, and they would go and basically kidnap them and bring them to these schools and try to teach them the white way to do things. The philosophy was kill the Indian, save the child. So there's some history of that in the United States of trying to take the Indian out. His sister, he finds out that his sister was also one of Mr. P's students and was a good student, and she loved romance novels and wanted to be a romance novel writer. Junior never knew that. She kind of kept that secret. But he tells him, you're a bright and shining star too. You're the smartest kid in the school, and I don't want you to fade away. You deserve better. You're a good kid. You deserve the world. And Junior says, wow, I wanted to cry. No teacher had ever said anything so nice, so incredibly nice to me. And Mr. P says, you have to leave this reservation. You were right to throw that book at me. I deserve to get smashed in the face for what I've done to Indians. Every white person on this res should get smashed in the face. But let me tell you this, all the Indians should get smashed in the face too. The only thing you kids are being taught is how to give up. All these kids have given up. All your friends, all the bullies, and their mothers and fathers have given up too. And their grandparents gave up, and the grandparents before them. And me and every other teacher here were all defeated. And so this kind of makes a change in Junior. He decides that he has to make a change. And so when his parents come home that day, he asks them the question, who has the most hope? And they both tell him simultaneously, white people. And so he says, I want to transfer schools. And they mention some schools on the reservation. And he's like, no, I want to go to the rich white school at 22 miles away. And his mom says, "You'll be the first one to ever leave the res this way. The Indians around here are going to be angry with you." But he decides to go anyways. Goes to Rowdy, and he asks Rowdy if he wants to come with him. But Rowdy decides not to. He tries to touch Rowdy on the shoulder, and Rowdy shoves him to the ground. And Junior writes, "My heart broke into 14 pieces, one for each year that Rowdy and I had been best friends. I started crying. That wasn't surprising at all, but Rowdy started crying too, and he hated that. And Rowdy gave out this big scream that everybody heard. And Junior reached out to try to touch him again. And Rowdy punched him in the face, saying, "You always thought you were better than me." And then he says, "But I had to stand eventually." He got up. When I did, I knew that my best friend had become my worst enemy. And so he goes off to the rich white school 22 miles away. His dad drove him. He told his dad that he was scared. And his dad tells him, "Just remember this, those white people aren't better than you." And they gave a big hug. And his dad says, "This is a great thing. You're so brave. You're a warrior," which again is an important phrase in Native American culture. So he's standing outside the white school, and he says, "Those kids aren't just white, they're translucent." And it's funny that the mascot of this high school was the Indians. So everyone goes in, he waits outside, he finally goes into the office, and they say, "Oh, we're expecting you. Here's your schedule." And they say, "You're late to homeroom, you better go." And so he goes, everyone's already there. He walks in, everyone stares at him. He meets this girl named Penelope, who says, "What's your name?" And she says, "My name's Junior." And then they call the roll, and the teacher asks, "Is Arnold Spirit here?" And so already he's like, Penelope's like, "You don't even know your name." And he tries to explain that he's Arnold Spirit Jr. People call him Junior, and it's all very confusing. And then he says this, "And yes, I had a stutter and a lisp, but I also had that sing-song reservation accent that made everything I said sound like a bad poem." So he's very self-conscious of this. On page 61, there's the unofficial rules of, what's the title here? The unofficial and unwritten, and you better follow them or you're going to get beaten twice as hard, Spokane Indian rules of fisticuffs. So this is how he grew up with these rules. 1, if somebody insults you, then you have to fight them. 2, if you think someone is going to insult you, then you have to fight them. 3, if you think someone is thinking about insulting you, you have to fight them. 4, if somebody insults any of your family or friends, or you think they're going to insult your family or friends, or if you think they're thinking about insulting your family or friends, you have to fight them. 5, you should never fight a girl unless she insults you, your family, or your friends, then you have to fight her. 6, if someone beats up your father or your mother, then you have to fight the son and or daughter of the person who beat up your mother or father. 7, if your mother or father beats up somebody, then that person's son and or daughter will fight you. 8, you must always pick fights with the sons and or daughters of any Indians who work for the Bureau of Indian Affairs. 9, you must always pick fights with the sons and or daughters of any white people who live anywhere near the reservation. 10, if you get in a fight with someone who is sure to beat you up, then you must throw the first punch because it's the only punch you'll ever get to throw. 11, in any fight, the loser is the first one who cries. And so this is the rules that he has grown up with. And so he's a target at Reardon High School, which is the white high school, and he's called names and, racist names like Chief, Sitting Bull, Tonto, Squaw Boy, Chief again. And so one day they're outside, and this big kid, Roger, the biggest kid in the school, he's told some really bad racist joke that's so bad that I'm not even going to tell you what the joke was. And it made, because he got insulted in the culture in which Junior grew up, he punched this huge kid. And the kid, Roger, just sat there and he said, "You punched me. I can't believe you punched me." And Junior says, "That's nothing. Come by after school right here and we'll finish this." And everyone was confused, including Junior, because he says he behaved exactly like he was supposed to behave, and he didn't understand the new rules in which he was living. And he asked Roger what the rules were. And Roger Excuse me. Roger couldn't explain them. He goes and tells his grandmother this, and his grandmother, because he's afraid that Roger and the other white kids are plotting a revenge on him. But his grandma says, you should have just walked away. And she says, I think it means he respects you, the fact that he didn't fight back. Roger, that is. The next day, his dad's not around to drive him, so he decides to walk the 22 miles to school. On the way, he meets Eugene, who is his dad's best friend, who's got a motorcycle. And he says he'll take them. So they're riding to the school with no helmet. And Eugene says, it's pretty cool you're doing this, which makes Junior feel better. And they get to school, and he gets off the motorcycle, and Roger comes over and is like, who's that? And he's like, oh, it's my dad's best friend. And again, we're riding up on a vintage motorcycle without any helmets. And Roger's like, that's pretty cool. But still, Penelope, the girl that he met on that first day, is still ignoring him. There's a girl, I think, on the reservation that Junior liked, and he told Rowdy that he liked her, and Rowdy says, Dawn doesn't give about you. And that made me cry, says Junior. Man, I've always cried too easily. I cry when I'm happy or sad. I cry when I'm angry. I'm cry because I'm crying. It's weak. It should say weak with an A. It's the opposite of warrior. So yeah, he couldn't really explain that. Halloween comes, and he decides to dress like a homeless dude, he says. And he gets to school, and Penelope's dressed as a homeless person too, which just is so wrong. You don't dress up like homeless people for Halloween, but they both do. And Penelope tells him, you have a good costume. You look really homeless. And he says back, well, you look really cute. And she says, I'm not trying to be cute. I'm wearing this to protest the treatment of homeless people in this country. And Junior thinks quickly and says, well, I said I'm wearing this to protest the treatment of homeless Native Americans in this country. And Penelope says, well, I guess that's pretty cool. Junior offers, and then Penelope says she's not collecting candy. She's going to collect change to give to the homeless people in the community. Junior says, well, I'm going to do the same thing. It's a great idea. Let's pool our money tomorrow. And so on the reservation, Junior went around and collected money and was surprised that people gave him a lot of money. Not a lot. I mean, it was like $10, he said. On his way home, though, people on the reservation, people jumped and beat him up, and they stole his money. But he gets home, and he's beat up with no money. But he says this, but that money and the idea of giving it to poor people had made me feel pretty good about myself. I was a poor kid raising money for other poor people. It made me feel almost honorable. So again, when you think about identity, you think about how it's developing in Junior and why it's developing. This is, I think, an important part to think about other people and how your identity might be formed in the eyes of other people or with the help of other people. When he gets to school, he confessed to Penelope what happened. He showed her the bruises, and she's very touched by it and reaches out and touches a bruise on his chest, and he thinks that's fantastic. She says, I'm sorry they did that to you. I'll still put your name on the money when I send it. And so Junior thinks that they've made a connection, but still Penelope ignores her. As Thanksgiving's approaching, he says he feels like a zombie. In fact, he writes, in fact, if you think of everybody with the body, a soul, and brain as human, then I was the opposite of human. It was the loneliest time of my life. And once I arrived at Reardon, I became something less than Indian. He knew he was smarter than most of the kids. He's smarter than some of the teachers that were there. One day on the way home, he took the bus to the end of the reservation and then had to walk the rest of the 22 miles. When he got home, his mother was crying and says that her sister got married and she's living in Montana. And this is interesting because, like, most of the Native Americans on the reservation are born and raised and die on the reservation. In fact, they say that parents like moved 2 miles, and that's the extent of how far they traveled in their lives. And then here is her sister in Montana. And he writes, but I just kept thinking that my sister's spirit hadn't been killed. So that's exciting that the people in his family, and he's recognizing the spirit of moving on. He meets a kid named Gordy at school, who is very smart, but is weird. He uses words like tautology and singular wit. And one day, Junior goes out to him and says, I want to be your friend. And they do become friends. They study together. They go to the library together. They're not as good as friends about like telling each other secrets like Rowdy and Junior were, but they're still good friends. Junior writes, he was an extremely weird dude, but he was the smartest person I'd ever known. He would always be the smartest person I'd ever known, and he certainly helped me through school. He not only tutored me and challenged me, but he made me realize that hard work, that the act of finishing, of completing, of accomplishing a task is joyous. And again, what is the role of other people in your lives? He gets an email from his sister, who again, if you remember, is in Montana, and she writes, Dear Junior, I love it here in Montana. It's beautiful. Yesterday I rode a horse for the first time. Indians still ride horses in Montana. I'm still looking for a job. I've sent applications to all the restaurants on the reservation. Yep, the Flathead Res has about 20 restaurants. It's weird. They have 6 or 7 towns too. Can you believe that? There's a lot of towns for one res. And you know what's really weird? Some of the towns on the res are filled with white people. I don't know what happened, but the people who live in those white towns don't always like Indians much. One of those towns called Polson tried to secede. That means quit. I looked it up. Really, it was like the Civil War. Even though the town is in the middle of the res, the white folks in that town decided they didn't want to be a part of the res. Crazy. But most of the people here are nice, the whites and Indians. And you know the best part is that there's really a great hotel where hubby and I had our honeymoon. It's on Flathead Lake, and we had a suite, a hotel room with its own separate bedroom. And there was a phone in the bathroom, really. I could have called you from the bathroom, but that's not even the most crazy part. We decided to order room service to have the food delivered to our room, and guess what they had in the menu? Indian fry bread. Yup, for $5 you could get fry bread. Crazy. So I ordered up 2 pieces. I didn't think it would be any good, especially not as good as Grandma's, but let me tell you, it was great. Almost as good as Grandma's. And they had the fried bread on this fancy plate, and so I ate it with this fancy fork and knife, and I just kept imagining there was some Flathead Indian grandma in the kitchen just making fried bread for all the room service people. It was a dream come true. I love my life. I love my husband. I love Montana. I love you, your sis Mary. And so she's having a great time and moving on with her life and having a good time. Thanksgiving comes to the reservation, and guess what they have? All the things that anybody else has for Thanksgiving: turkey and potatoes, gravy, green beans, corn, everything else. And he says this, Junior does. I always think it's funny when Indians celebrate Thanksgiving. I mean, sure, the Indians and Pilgrims were best friends during the first Thanksgiving, but a few years later, the Pilgrims were shooting Indians. So I'm never quite sure why we eat turkey like everybody else. He really misses Rowdy, so he takes a cartoon drawing of Rowdy and him together, and he takes it over to Rowdy's house, and Rowdy's dad answers and he says, would you give this to Rowdy? And Rowdy's father says, you're kind of gay, aren't you? Junior says, can you just give it to him? And his father says, yeah, I'll give it to him, even if it's a little gay. So the door closes and Junior walks away, and he looks back. As he's walking away, he begins to understand, to be empathetic towards Rowdy and the anger that Rowdy has towards everyone because of what a horrible human being Rowdy's father is. But he looks back and he sees Rowdy in the window, and Junior waves back at him, and Rowdy flips him off. And there you go. One day at school, the white school, Junior decides he's got to go to the bathroom. He just hates the class, and so he goes to the bathroom, but then he hears in the girls' room vomiting, like extreme vomiting, and he knocks on the door and asks if they're okay, and they say, go away. But Rowdy waits, and it's Penelope that comes out, and he discovers that Penelope is anorexic, or bulimic. And he says, he recognized that same kind of attitude, just like her dad, that they have this problem that they probably need help with. And he tells Penelope, don't give up. Penelope starts crying and explains that how lonely she is and how scared she is. And so that they become friends at that moment. Maybe a little bit more than friends. Junior finds out that Penelope's father, Earl, is a racist. Earl says this to him, kid, you better keep your hands out of my daughter's panties. She's only dating you because she knows it will piss you off, so I ain't going to get pissed. And if I get pissed, then she'll stop dating you. In the meantime, you just keep your trouser snake in your trousers, and I won't have to punch you in the stomach. So there you go. But they did kiss a few times, at the end of the school day, and held hands a few times, and everyone in the school thought that he was a major stud, according to the book. And he thinks people started liking him because he was something new. He was something new. He was something different than their dull daily lives, perhaps. Penelope and her talk about dreams. She tells him that she dreams about traveling the world and going to places like the Great Wall of China and going to all these places and the pyramids. And he laughs at her. And then she's kind of taken aback by that. And he realizes that he shouldn't be doing that. And he writes this, we were supposed to be happy with our limitations, but there was no way Penelope and I were going to sit still. Nope, we both wanted to fly. And so if you've read other books in this class, this concept of flying is always a nice analogy or a metaphor of trying to get out, of trying to go places, trying to be something different. There's a section in here about Junior watching Penelope play volleyball, and he's kind of falling in love with Penelope, and so he emails Rowdy. He says, hey, Rowdy, I'm in love with the white girl. What should I do? Rowdy's response is, hey, I'm sick of Indian guys who treat white women like bowling trophies. Get a life. So still this broken friendship between him and Rowdy has not yet been fixed. He asked Gordy about this, and Gordy says, I've got to do some research. And he says this article said that over 200 Mexican girls have disappeared in the last 3 years in that same part of the country, and no one says much about that. And that's racist. The guy who wrote the article says people care more about white girls than they do about everybody else on the planet. White girls are privileged. They're damsels in distress. And basically Gordy says, I think you're a racist for being in love with her. So I think there's maybe some truth in all of that. But I'll let you think about that. The big winter formal is coming up at the high school. And Junior says this, I always felt like a stranger in any place anyway, at the reservation there at the high school. I was half Indian in one place and half white in the other. It was like being an Indian was my job, but it was only a part-time job, and it didn't pay well at all. He realizes that Penelope and his parents, Junior, realizes that these are the only people who are really working for him and helping him. But the winter formal comes around, he only has $5. He has to wear one of his father's old suits, but when he shows up at the dance, people are like, oh, it's so retro, it's so cool. They have a great time. They dance all night long. They dance to every song. And when the dance is over, they all decide to go to a pancake house, 24-hour pancake house, get pancakes. And so they go, but Junior realizes, he knows he can't pay for it, but they order the meals anyways. And so while they're eating, Junior goes to the bathroom and he gets sick. And Roger comes in to check on him. And he tells Roger he's forgotten his wallet. And Roger's like, no worries, I got you. So Roger pays for everything. And in the parking lot on the way out, Penelope asks him, can I ask you something big? Are you poor? And Junior says, yes, I'm poor. And Penelope says, how are you getting home? And he says, I'm just going to hitchhike home. And Penelope starts crying. She goes and tells Roger this. and Roger drives Junior home, and he drives him home many nights after that. And Junior writes, if you let people into your life a little bit, they can be pretty amazing. So once again, like this idea of other people and community and family and friendship and all of these things, how important is this in your own development? I like this. He writes, the people at home, a lot of them call me an apple. They call me an apple because they think I'm red on the outside and white on the inside. And he tells this to Gordy, and Gordy says, well, life is a constant struggle between being an individual and being a member of the community. So I want you to think of that concept too, of how much of yourself do you give up to be part of a community? How much is it fair to have of the community to ask you to be less of yourself? And they decide to be a tribe of two, Gordy and Junior. He gets a letter from his sister. Dear Junior, it says, I'm still looking for a job. They keep telling me I don't have enough experience, but how can I get enough experience if they don't give me a chance to get experience? Oh, well, I have a lot of free time, so I've started to write my life story. Really? Isn't that crazy? I think I'm going to call it How to Run Away from Your House and Find Your Home. What do you think? Tell everybody I love them and miss them. Love, your big sis. P.S. And we've moved into a new house. It's the most gorgeous place in the world. So again, her sister's struggling a little bit, but still doing pretty well. Junior talks with his dad about things, and his dad says, I met your mom when I was 5. She was 13. She helped him get a drink out of the drinking fountain because he was so short. But he says the lesson he learned there was to dream big. And so Junior's going to try out for the basketball team. There's a varsity team, a JV team, and a C squad. And he was sure he was going to get put on the C squad. But 40 kids show up to try out, and the coach announces that because of the budget cuts, there's no C squad, so there's only 24 spots, 12 people on the varsity team, 12 people on the JV team. So they're trying out, and they're playing one-on-one, full court one-on-one, and he has to go up against Roger. Again, Roger's this huge kid, and Roger runs over him, and he falls on the ground, but he gets up again and again and again. And the coach is like, you don't have to do this. He's like, yes, I do. He keeps getting up. But when it's over, they're waiting in line. Roger fist bumps him and says, good job. And it was at that moment Junior says that he knew he was going to make the team. And in fact, he makes the varsity team. The first game is against his old high school, and he throws up 4 times before the game. The game is at the reservation. The crowd's yelling, Arnold sucks. Not even Junior, but now Arnold sucks. There's cops there. When they walk onto the court, everyone turns their back. But Junior laughs. That's the only sound of the gym, is him laughing. When he gets into the game, someone throws a quarter. It hits Junior in the head, and blood starts pouring down from his face. He goes into the locker room, and Eugene is there, his dad's friend, who is like the EMT guy in the reservation. And he gives him 3 stitches. He's going to take him to the hospital, but he's going to give him 3 stitches. So Eugene does it right there in the locker room. So Junior gets back out there, and there's a breakaway. Junior's on a breakaway, and Rowdy jumps up. Rowdy's on the other team, the reservation team. He's pretty good at basketball too. Rowdy jumps up, and instead of going for the ball, he puts an elbow into Junior's head, knocks him out, and there's a big fight on the court. Junior's team is giving two free throws for a technical foul against Rowdy, but the Welpenit, the reservation team, gets 10 free throws because of technical fouls against the players of Reardon, the white school, and Welpenit wins by 30. They take Junior to the hospital because of his brain condition and want to make sure he's okay. And the coach comes and stays with him that night, and there's a special night really between them. Christmas comes. Dad leaves the house on Christmas Eve and comes back on January 2nd, and he goes drinking the whole time. And he says when he comes back finally, he says, "I got something for you, got a gift for you, and it's $5." And while that might not sound like a lot to us, Junior is touched by this because how easy it would have been for him to spend that $5, but instead he saved it and brought it home. Junior is empathetic towards the white kids too. Look here, he says, "I've learned that the worst thing a parent can do is ignore their children. And trust me, there are plenty of Reardon kids who get ignored by their parents. Everyone knows each other on the reservation. People at Reardon are strangers." So he's kind of making this difference between Native Americans and white people. He talks to his grandmother, and his grandmother says that, that Native Americans used to be forgiving of any kind of eccentricity. In fact, weird people were celebrated. Like epileptics were considered special. Gay people could do anything in Native American culture, and they were considered special. That it wasn't until white people and Christianity came that suddenly their views were changing. And his grandmother loved everyone, and everyone seemed to love her. In fact, she loved everyone so much that she wanted the family to forgive the drunk driver who eventually killed her. So her grandmother dies. They have the wake. 2,000 people show up. Junior says it's fun and sad at the same time. The rich white guy, this billionaire, they say, comes to the wake, and he gets up and he says, "Oh, I've always loved Indians, and I've loved Native American culture, and I collect the art, and blah, blah, blah." And he says, this one day, a Native American came to my door and knocked on it and says, "I have this outfit of a woman's powwow dancing outfit that I'd like to sell." And so the guy gave him $1,000 for it, but he wanted to return it, but he also wanted to keep it. And so he decided he was going to drive to the reservation to find out whose it is. And they told him it was a grandmother spirit, which is the woman who died. And so he brought it back that day. That just happened to be the day of the funeral of his grandmother. And then Junior's mom said, "Well, you got the wrong grandmother, because this grandmother never danced." And so the white guy felt kind of embarrassed, got into his car and left. And everyone, all 2,000 people, just laughed and roared at that situation. But everyone was there because he said every funeral on the reservation was a funeral for all of us. So hopefully you're seeing there's a difference between the communities here. Is there a difference between the white community he's a part of and the Native American community that he's a part of? And they both have good and bad things probably about them. Eugene, who is his father's best friend, was shot by his friend in the face because they were so drunk. And Junior's having a tough time with all of this, his grandmother dying and now Eugene dying. And he talks to Gordy about this concept of grief. And Gordy says you should read this guy named Euripides, who back in Greek culture, right? And one of the things Euripides wrote was, "What greater grief than the loss of one's native land?" And this hits home for Junior as well. And he says during those weeks, he was just joyless. He missed a lot of school too. And so when he finally showed up, one teacher said, "Oh, we have a special guest in the class." And he published, I think it's a female teacher, she publicly ridicules Junior for not being in class. And it made Junior so angry, but before he could do anything, Gordy stands up and drops a book loudly on the floor. Then Penelope stands up, loudly slams a book on the floor. Then Roger, and everyone slams their book on the floor, and they walk out. And the only person left in the class is Junior. And he says this, "I used to think the world was broken down by tribes." He says this to the teacher. "I used to think the world was broken down by tribes, by black and white, by Indian and white. But I know that isn't true. The world is only broken into two tribes, the people who are and the people who are not." And then he walks out. And in the midst of his grief, he writes down all the things that are important to him. He writes down some lists. like the people that gave him the most joy in his life. He wrote these people: Rowdy, my mother, my father, my grandmother, Eugene, Coach, Roger, Gordy, Penelope, even if she only partially loves me. Made a list of the musicians who had played the most joyous music: Patsy Cline, my mother's favorite; Hank Williams, my father's favorite; Jimi Hendrix, my grandmother's favorite; Guns N' Roses, my big sister's favorite; White Stripes, my favorite. A list of his favorite foods: pizza, chocolate pudding, peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, banana cream pie, fried chicken, mac and cheese, hamburgers, french fries, grapes. I made a list of my favorite books: The Grapes of Wrath, Catcher in the Rye, Bat Kid Rules the World, Tangerine, Feed, Catalyst, Invisible Man, Fool's Crow, Jar of Fools. And I made a list of my favorite basketball players: Dwayne Wade, Shane Battier, Steve Nash, Ray Allen, Adam Morrison, Julius Erving, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, George Gervin, Muggsy Bogues. And this was a way to kind of figure out some of the happy things in his life that he wanted to focus on rather than the sadness that was occurring. He becomes a starter on the basketball team. He's really good, but he still throws up before every game. They call him a yucker because that's what he does. There's the big rematch with Welpin at his old high school on the reservation, and it's a big thing. The TV news is there, and they keep asking. They interview him beforehand, and they ask him questions like, "What's it like to be playing your old school?" And he says things like "weird," and the TV reporter has to cut him off, and he's like, "Can't you say something other than that?" And so finally, he says this: "I have to prove that I'm stronger than everybody else. I have to prove that I will never give up. I will never quit playing hard. And I don't just mean in basketball. I'm never going to quit living this hard, you know. I'm never going to surrender to anybody. Never, ever, ever." Which kind of takes the TV reporter back. There's 2,000 people there. His dad is up in his normal place, who's never missed a game, even though he might not be the greatest father. Penelope's there. She blows him a kiss. There are boos. So the game is at his white high school, Reardon. There are boos when the other team comes in. The opening tip happens. Rowdy gets the ball. He's driving towards the basket. He wants to dunk. He's going to dunk the ball, and he's going to send a message here right at the beginning. But instead of dunking it, somehow Junior says he feels like he's flying, and instead of Rowdy dunking the ball, he just takes the ball right away from Rowdy, dribbles it back down the floor. And Junior's teammate said he was just grinning like a crazy person as he dribbled down the floor, and he stopped up short and shot a three-pointer. It went in. The crowd erupted. People were crying. He said his dad turned and hugged a white person next to him. His mom faded and was out for like 5 minutes. It was just a great success. Their team won by 40 points. Rowdy only had 4 points. There's a huge celebration going on in the gym. And Junior was a huge, held up on people's shoulders and things. But then he writes this: "But I looked over at the well-penned Redskins," said Rowdy. "I knew that 2 or 3 of those Indians might not have eaten breakfast that morning. No food in the house. I knew that 7 or 8 of those Indians lived with drunken mothers and fathers. I knew 2 of those Indians had fathers in prison. I knew that none of them was going to college. And I knew that Rowdy's father was probably going to beat the crap out of him for losing the game. I was suddenly ashamed." So he goes into the locker room, and he pukes, and he cries, and the team thinks he's crying because of how happy he is, but he's really crying because he's ashamed, and he knows what the truth is. The basketball season goes well, but they lose in the playoffs. They don't win the state championship or whatever, like you might think. After the game, Junior emails Rowdy again, and they kind of insult each other through email, but in a friendly way. So maybe something's happening there. Junior reveals that in his 14 years, he's been to 42 funerals. 90% of those have been because of alcohol. So he's feeling sad that he has had this pain and sorrow in his life that maybe other people have not, and that must have an impact on how he sees things. One day, the counselor comes in and takes him out of class, and she hugs him and says, your sister died, and your father is coming. And so they wait outside in the snow, and Junior's worried that his father's going to get into a car accident on the way there and die too. And so he starts just laughing at this absurdity of the situation. His father gets there finally, and he hugs them, and he's still laughing all the way home. And his father's worried that he's gone crazy, right? He finally asked how his sister died, and they said that the house burned down and they were too drunk to even wake up. And so they burned in the fire. His mom hugs him tight and slaps him 2 or 3 times and makes him promise never to drink. And at the funeral, there's a funeral going on, and he's just sick of the funeral, so he runs into the nearby woods, and he runs into Rowdy, who's also hiding in the woods, and Rowdy's crying. And he reaches out and touches Rowdy again, like to hug, to, you know, have this human connection. Rowdy tries to punch him, but he misses, and he says, "You missed because you're crying so hard," and laughed at him and all that. And Rowdy says, "I hate you." And they break up and they could go their own way. The next day he goes back to school. He doesn't know what else to do. He goes back to school, and everyone is there to hug him or slap him on the back or punch him in the gut or whatever. And he writes this: "They worried for me. They want to help me with my pain. I was important to them. I mattered." Wow. So he goes to, him and his father and his mother go to the cemetery to clean the graves of the grandmother and their sister, his sister and Eugene. And they begin weeping, crying. It made me cry for my sister. It made me cry for myself, but I was crying for my tribe too. I was crying because I knew 5 or 10 or 15 more Spokaneans would die during the next year, and that most of them would die because of booze. I cried because so many of my fellow tribal members were slowly killing themselves, and I wanted them to live. I wanted them to get strong and get sober and get the hell off the res. It's a weird thing. Reservations were meant to be prisons, you know. Indians were supposed to move onto reservations and die. We were supposed to disappear. But somehow or another, Indians had forgotten that reservations were meant to be death camps. I wept because I was the only one who was brave and crazy enough to leave the res. I was the only one with enough arrogance. I wept and wept and wept because I knew that I was never going to drink, and because I was never going to kill myself, and because I was going to have a better life out in the white world. I realized that I might be a lonely Indian boy, but I was not alone in my loneliness. There were millions of other Americans who had left their birthplaces in search of a dream. I realized that, sure, I was a Spokane Indian. I belonged to that tribe, but I also belonged to the tribe of American immigrants, and to the tribe of basketball players, and to the tribe of bookworms, and the tribe of cartoonists, and the tribe of chronic and teenage boys, and small-town kids, and Pacific Northwesterners, and tortilla chips and salsa lovers, and poverty, funeral goers, beloved sons, and the tribes of boys who really missed their friends. It was a huge realization, and that's when I knew I was going to be okay. But it also reminded me of the people who were not going to be okay. It made me think of Rowdy. I missed him so much. I wanted to find him and hug him and beg him to forgive me for leaving. And so the last chapter of the book is talking about turtles. They meet up with Rowdy, and they decide to go to Turtle Creek, which is like a really deep lake that they haven't even found the bottom of. It's so deep. It's like an old volcano. They come across a tall tree, and they decide to climb it, and even though they're afraid they might fall or whatever. And again, Junior asked Rowdy to come to school with him, to come with him. And Rowdy says, "I've been reading this book, and I came across this term, nomadic." And Rowdy says, "I always knew you were going to leave. I always knew you were going to leave us behind and travel the world. I had this dream about you a few months ago. You were standing on the Great Wall of China. You looked happy. And I was happy for you." And Rowdy says, "You're the nomadic one. I'm not. I'm going to stay here." And they play basketball one-on-one forever, the whole day, into the night, until it gets too dark, until the lights light up the court. But this time, they didn't keep score. That's the end. So there's so many things to think about here. And I include this book in here in 2007 because I wonder why this book could be written in 2007 and why it wasn't written earlier. And maybe it was. There's another book on the list called Sundown by a Native American author that might be interesting to you as well. But even in 2007, I include this little thing about this House bill in Arizona in 2010 because this book, The Absolutely True Diary of a Part-Time Indian, was banned from Arizona schools because of this bill. And what did this bill do? It says, prohibits a school district or charter school from including in its program of instruction any courses or classes that, one, promotes the overthrow of the federal or state government or the Constitution, promotes resentment toward any race or class, advocates ethnic solidarity instead of being individuals, or are designed for a certain ethnicity. So because of those restrictions, this book was banned. And so I think we've come a long way in this country, and we certainly have. But still, when we have places like this, like in Arizona, that has a law like this put into place in 2010, maybe we still have some work to do. Luckily, this bill was ruled unconstitutional, I think just last August. So it's no longer part of the laws, but still there were enough people who made this happen. So back to the things that I wanted you to think about. Why is this book called Absolutely True and a Part-Time Indian? And what does this mean to your identity? And what do others have to do with your identity? How can your identity and who you are be developed and processed and expanded and all of those things by the interaction with other people? What role did race play in all of this? And what role does race play in the world today? And why is this book in 2007, even though the things about Arizona that I just told you? Certainly there's this thing about pain and sorrow and empathy and all of that are important in this as well. Maybe this can help you understand the world in which you live a little bit better. And certainly there are the issues of friendship and the importance of friendship, maybe across differences even, and the importance of family, even though family might not be perfect. So what a great book. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Like I said, it's in the library, so if you want to read it yourself, you can. It's a quick read. You can probably finish it in a couple days. But it's fantastic. So please enjoy that. I look forward to your analysis, and I will see you next time.